Hi, everybody. My name is Tony Ann Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. As you know, I always enjoy having a good author on the show. So today we have a great author. We're going to pick the brain of Linda Broenniman. So welcome, Linda, if I may call you that.
Yes, thank you so much, Tony. It's just an honor to be on your show.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. I read your book,
Great.
uh, and I mean, I thought it was really fascinating. I think for all of us who do not think about legacy, right, and our family history, who don't give it a second thought, as to where we come from. Right.
Yeah.
It's easy to just only go as far as our grandparents and think, oh, I'm Irish, I'm Italian, I'm Polish, and just to see yourself in the lens of where you were raised, the atmosphere you were raised. But to really reach back and see the journey, I think that's fascinating, right? The journey of your ancestors who lead you to this moment. And that's sort of exactly what your book does, right? You go back 8 generations,
Eight generations, yes.
right? And then get some surprises, right?
Many, many surprises. So it started out, yes, because just as you said, when I grew up, my parents were Hungarian Catholic parents. I knew they survived World War II, but they didn't really talk about their past. Their past was, not something to talk about. My grandmothers also lived with us. They actually escaped from Hungary in 1956. And
Wow.
so they lived with us also, but we didn't have grandfathers. And when I would ask, we had a portrait of my grandfather in the dining room. And I remember asking my grandmother a little bit about him, but she got so sad and so upset, then you don't want to upset your parents or your grandparents. So she just didn't talk about them. And at once I remember her saying once that, oh, he was taken as a political prisoner and died in a concentration camp. And that's what I knew. That's it. And they never talked about certainly their Jewish heritage. So when I was 27, my sister traveled. My sister's a doctor, and she traveled for a medical conference to Montreal and stayed with her godmother and asked what she thought was a really innocent question. What was my great grandmother Margie like? And the answer came back, well, like most Jewish women, she was, strong and kind and wonderful, but she ruled the roost. And of course, the shock on my sister's face must have been, amazing. And her godmother said, well, I thought your parents told you. So that's how we found out that we were Jewish. So at age 27, it was like, oh, we're not Catholic. My father was Jewish, came from a Jewish background.
Well, even just, I mean, before you even found that out, I mean, I think it's fascinating, something a lot of people dismiss, but to talk to relatives, like the older people in the family, and find out, because what we complain about, right? It like rains 3 days in a row and we're like kicking a stone down the street, right? We start complaining, right? And then you said something earlier, like they escaped from Budapest, right? I mean, think of what their lives were like. Like to them, a little blip in their story, um, is right, that they fled and started over again, someplace where they, you know, had no roots or background and had to begin again. And imagine that being part of your story as an individual person. I mean, that's so significant. And I think that a lot of older people have really interesting stories like that, right? As the world has evolved, right? As these major things, events occurred historically, and they survived them, right? And there's such a resource, for resilience, for what we complain about and think is something, unimaginable to endure. I mean, what our ancestors actually did endure, I mean, that's just a wealthy resource of I think kind of human, you know, dignity, and resilience. I love that. But so okay, so let me take you back to you're literally 27 years old. You're finding out that um, maybe you're not Catholic. Maybe you're historically, your family was Jewish, and at some point, did they actually convert?
Well, what happened is during the war or leading up to the war, my mother was Catholic, but my father did convert, of in 1939. So Hungary didn't actually get into the war until 1944, but there was all the anti-Jewish laws
Yeah,
started coming into effect by 1938. So he did
yeah.
convert, but a lot of it was out of convenience, just trying, and I shouldn't say convenience, that's not the right word, but it was trying to um still have a livelihood. Like my father's father, my grandfather, converted, but he was a lawyer trying to keep food on the table, right? Trying to keep his clients, trying to keep his practice going, and so they almost had to convert in order to do that. But in the end, it didn't make a difference anyway. So
So let's talk about the process of putting this book together.
yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. So let me take you back a little bit. So in 2011, my parents' house caught fire. And sort of surprisingly, this box was saved. And in the chaos of trying to salvage what she could, my sister was just pulling things out of the house and didn't even realize that she had pulled this box out, and it got put in a closet. And and then in 2017, I decided it was time for me to really start looking into my family history. And she just happened to rediscover the box and sent it to me. And in it were all of these documents and um, just old documents, old letters that were almost illegible, and a lot of photos. And they were all Hungarian. So I needed somebody to help me translate. And in so doing, and through a friend of a friend, I found somebody here and close to me, about a half an hour away, um, who, when she took a look at some of the documents, said, "These are really important documents and they should be in a museum, but you really need to have somebody research them." And she put me in touch with a lawyer and sociologist in Hungary called András Kaczynski, and he was just absolutely remarkable. And that really started our journey of finding out all this information about our my family. For example, before we even started, he did an internet search, and there were over 300 articles just written about my great great grandfather Ignaz Misner, who was a prominent lawyer in Budapest and one of the founders of the Budapest Bar. So,
So what's happening as you're uncovering each piece?
so what? So back to the writing. I realized that I needed to understand history because my history, and I went to good schools, but my history education was not where it needed to be. So I just delved into reading history books and biographies and anything I could read about those times. And so as we started to understand the stories and learn about the stories and piece them together from articles and books and so many different sources, um, I needed a way to sort of contain the information. And so I just started writing and trying to put their stories into the historical context so I could understand them better. And it was my way, really, truthfully, it was my way to get close to them, to really, not only understand them, but to try to feel them and really connect with what they might have been feeling and thinking of in that time. So that's
So
how
would
the
you say
book
this
came out.
started more like a diary of sorts, like just trying to, or a log?
Yeah, really more of a way to organize all the information. So
Mm.
yes, yeah. And then what happened is, as Andras did his research, a lot of he interacted with a lot of other historians also, and mostly with there's something called the Hungarian Jewish Museum and Archives in Budapest, and they're the ones that sort of manage the Dohane Synagogue, which is one of the biggest synagogues in the world. Um, and they had gotten money to renovate the Rumbach Synagogue, which is just a couple blocks away. It's a beautiful synagogue, really architecturally stunning. But it had never been renovated since World War II. And as part of the renovation, they wanted to put together a permanent exhibit that would really truly inspire others to look more into their own family and their own heritage. Because after World War II and the communist takeover of Hungary, the communists were just as anti-Semitic, and there was no religion that was allowed to be practiced. So many Jews in Hungary really had no idea of their own heritage. So this exhibit was meant to inspire others to research it, and they decided to use my family as the basis of the exhibit.
And I mean, it's still, I mean, there is still an exhibit there in Budapest, Hungary.
It's a permanent exhibit.
Yeah.
It's a permanent exhibit, and it's the heart of the exhibit is 10 films, and each film is based on the stories and the pictures that are in the book. So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, so when did you start realizing? I mean, so you're keeping a log more or less, of what you're taking in just so that you can understand it. Maybe you can place it in a timeline. But when do you start to see it come to form, and think maybe I have something here, like maybe I have a book in the making?
Yeah, I think it just started to become so full, and I would interact with. I had a very close friend who way back when I first found out about, even before I found out about my Jewish heritage, she kept saying, "You need to look into your family stories." So she was the one who said, "Oh, you need to really, as you're discovering this, you need to write it down so they can't be forgotten, quite frankly." And so I would share things with her, and she was like, "Yeah, you need to put this in place." And then when this exhibit really started to also form at the same time, it was I really needed to publish a book so people could not only see these 10-minute, films, but could really delve deeper into the stories. So
So, I mean, now you realize at this point, like this is something I need to do. How hard was it to really put it together? Because it still reads like a very interesting story, right? Even though it doesn't read like a log of data. So I mean, how hard was that to do to put that together? What
well,
was the
I
creative
think
process?
Yeah, I think it wasn't so much the process. I was so fascinated with each of the characters, and I call them characters because they could be characters out of a fictional story in some cases, but they weren't. They were real people. And so as I learned these stories, I just I just sort of fell in love with them. And
Yeah.
so I had to focus on each one and dive deep into each individual that I wrote about. And there's so many more that I knew, just little pieces about, but but didn't have enough information to really do a whole chapter. So yeah.
Yeah, I even love the name, right? The Politzer. I hope I'm saying Politzer right.
Oh,
Politzer
it's exactly.
Saga.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it kind of says it all. Like, hey, it took a lot to get here, but here we are.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of like calls that out, but I thought it was kind of a very witty, very, very witty title.
Oh, thank you.
So I mean, and there's tons of pictures too. So it's not like you're just reading the story. You're getting a little glimpse into historically what these people actually look like, and
Right.
um, so there's kind of a vision. You did like a visual storytelling component, I think, to the book, which I liked.
Yeah, that was important to me because, as I said, they could be fictional characters, but they were so um, incredible, I thought, that I wanted the reader to feel that they were real and they're real people. So I wanted the reader to feel that, and I think the pictures sort of would help that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I felt like I said, this sort of a that's that in any film, right? With any film, there's the visual storyteller. There's
Right,
always the writer who puts it on paper, and then the actors who sort of breathe life into paper character, But you always have a director, cinematographer. They come in and they visually tell you that story, don't they? They kind of visually weave you through. It's meant to just, create the impression and in the
right.
brain and leave you feeling like you understand just by how they weaved you through. And I thought you really captured that because you kind of visually tell a story just as much as you verbally tell the story,
Oh,
um,
thank you.
which I really liked. Um, and I mean, I liked the idea that you went back as far as you did. And I think it made me think, right? It should make anybody think, like, what would I learn if I went back that far? We all tend to only know, what is a very, like I said in the beginning, narrow window,
Right,
into, what our family is like, or, most of us stop at our grandparents. But you were able to go back much further. And even if your grandparents told you something about their parents, you didn't go back much further than that. Nobody
right.
was telling you about their grandparents and their great great grandparents, or really passing along that level of story. And the same was true in your family, right? But for the fact that the godmother tells something and then you stumble on the box, these are forgotten memories, and I think the fact that you gave them a permanent life. To your credit, it is pretty amazing. That's a daunting project to have undertaken, I think, to put it together that way, like to have kind of
Thank
like
you.
that seamless, nice feel to it. You feel like you're reading the story, and just getting this little glimpse into this family. I would say like I'm a really big literary fiction buff. I love those multi-generational, messy lives kind of stories. So I mean, for me, that was the real life, I guess, version of that. So I sort of
Yeah,
dug that, about the book. I was wondering though, you have a background in psychology, right? Your college degree,
right.
psychology. I wonder if that had an impact on how you processed the information as you were learning it, and enabled you maybe to see these people closer to their true, to the true identity. I mean, did you think that helped?
I think it did help. I think, and that's something, I haven't practiced psychology, but I think, just in the way we think about people and how they process the trauma that they went through, just as you said
Yeah.
before, they went through these, cataclysmic events that really changed history, and
And
that's
they didn't know it.
and they didn't know it exactly. But when you think about how an individual experiences those events, I think it's hard for us because we haven't experienced anything like that. And to learn about how they, processed their lives and how they were so incredibly resilient and courageous um, and and kept their humanity in the
Yeah.
face of such, I don't know how else to say it, but in the face of such violence and evil, it's hard to think about. So,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it says so much, right, about that generation in general. Because if you just take a snapshot of what's happening, in in that generation. I mean, it's not just, your answer. I mean, there's so many moving parts globally,
Right,
that are happening in that particular period of time.
right.
And I think that, it's hard to imagine that the whole generation didn't come out with PTSD, right?
Ex-
Because I mean,
Exactly.
there's so many moving parts. There's so many things changing dramatically. As you put, there's violence there, their lives were really turned upside down. And to them, you know, it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I mean, it was the grind of what life looked like. Um, and they just rolled with it, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Unaware that they were part of history, unaware of, really how they would spark a change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a pretty interesting component. I mean, I'm a real history buff too, so I mean, I like to go back and look at how we got here. I think that's an important part of everybody's story, no matter where you live in the world, how you got to this moment in time. It would be kind of naive, I think, to assume that you existed just, in your in what you're experiencing, right? I
Right,
mean, the world's been
right,
evolving, for a long time, and I think like to understand as best you can portions of the journey of how you've gotten to live the life you're living now, um, which comparatively, is a very blessed existence, by comparison to the trials and tribulations of what people used to endure. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I think keeping that memory alive, right? It would be a shame to forget the journeys. And I think that the way you shed some light on it, is not just a history book. I love what you did because I think some of the way you do is capture those individual stories. You tell us about real people and what their journey was, what that family's journey was. And I think that's a way to help keep that time period snapshot alive for people to look at and really understand.
Right. Right. Well, I agree. You take a look and one of the biggest things is how they survived, or not all of them, but those that survived the Holocaust and what life looked like on a day-to-day basis. And I think, part of the reason that it was important for me to write the book was to 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 see these people, and to me they were so inspirational in terms of their resilience and their courage,
Yeah.
and as I said before, also their compassion and generosity, so that even afterwards, even after they went through these horrific events, they still were just generous and focused on how could they help others. And
Sure, being part of the community, helping the
right,
community advance, growing up their families and their kids to have nice lives and
yeah,
educations, and
yeah.
yeah,
I look at my parents, and my parents were all about service, and part of their whole reason for becoming doctors was because they wanted to serve humanity, and that was core to them. Those values were so core. And when you look at what they went through and what they faced, it's really quite remarkable.
I
So
mean it is, and you realize how they got instilled, right? You're coming from generations of people who had that at their core, right? That
exactly. Yeah.
that I mean, and I don't think arguably you emerge from those kind of events without learning to act as a group, like without community, without leaning on each other, without the help of the those around you. That's usually how people emerge uh, from
But
that.
in
So
this case, I will say that wasn't really the case, because when you think about it, I think about, for example, my mother's story, and my mother, again, she was Catholic, so, but she was she hid Jews during the Holocaust, for which she was honored as a righteous among the nations. And for your listeners, that's righteous among the nations is really the highest award that the state of Israel gives to non-Jews who saved Jews during the war. We all know the name Oscar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg and Irina Sendler, but so my mother was among those. But I remember her saying that at that time, neighbors turned on neighbors, even
Mm.
friends betrayed one another. It
Fear.
was a horrific time. And part of the problem was that they were encouraged to turn on one another. They were paid if they could, tell, out of a family or so on. So
And
it was,
probably afraid as well,
oh, so
right?
afraid,
Historically,
because
that,
if they didn't, because those that hit people were at risk of being murdered themselves.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, when I learned about what my mother went through, it's hard to believe that someone could go through that and come out the other end.
yeah. Wow. So, I mean, so now you put the book together. How hard is it to release it into the world?
Actually, I've been doing some book talks and I've been in podcasts, and I love talking about it because to me, again, these I want everyone to be inspired by their values and to carry these values on. I think it's so important. And you had said yourself, just this we're going through a difficult time now where you know my mother, for example, we grew up. Um, my mother would always say to us, we were raised that no matter what a person's, skin color, religion, ethnicity, um, uh, financial status, you treat everyone with respect and dignity and compassion. And I think that message needs to carry through, especially now, you know.
Yeah. So it wasn't, you didn't have a sense of, um, this is something I created. I mean, some authors do, right? They create something and then when they have to release it, it's difficult, right? To put it out there and let other people judge it, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, did you experience a little of that?
Well, yes, a little of that. This is my first book, so there's always the trepidation. Oh, is it really written that well, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it was really important for me to get it out because their stories were already out because of the exhibit at the Rambach Synagogue,
Yeah.
and I wanted people to be able to delve more deeply into what their true stories is as much as I could uncover, but what they really were like. So,
Where can people start if people want to investigate? What do you recommend?
in terms of my story, or
Well, we're gonna get to your story in a minute, but like if
okay,
somebody gets inspired by this and thinks, well, I want to look into
into
my family, would you recommend any particular
what
avenues?
the biggest thing is, I think, to talk to those who are alive.
Yeah.
How I had
Oral
wished,
history.
yeah, how I had wished that I had pushed. There was this web of secrecy that I felt like I couldn't penetrate when I was growing up. But I wish I had. I wish I'd just asked and asked and asked until I got some answers. Especially, for example, my grandmother, my father's mother. Some of these people that are in the book, like Adam Politzer, for example, he was world famous. To this day, if you ask somebody who Adam Politzer, if you ask an ear, nose, and throat surgeon who Adam Politzer was, they know him. He's still considered today the father of otology. So when I think about my grandmother knew him. He died in 1920, but my grandmother she was 19 when he died, so she would have known him. And if I could have learned about him through my grandmother's stories, how I mean, it would have been incredible.
Yeah.
So So yeah, so I think the biggest thing is ask those who are still alive.
Yeah. And usually most places, have a library. That's usually, I think, the best place to start. I'm a big fan of libraries. And
Yes.
and honestly, they love a good research project. If you go in and tell them you're looking for a particular country time, they will help you.
Right.
Libraries local to where you know your family started. Also, they'll have photographs
Yeah.
um, and newspapers and ways to help you. And librarians will love the concept of helping you investigate.
Yeah.
So,
Both libraries, and there's a lot of genealogical societies in almost every city. There's genealogical societies that can help too. So yeah,
sure,
both those are
sure.
great
So
resources.
now tell people how they can read more about you, how they can get a copy of the book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have a website called PolitzerSaga.com, and there's a lot of information on the website. And also they can get a book through Amazon and Barnes and Noble and a few bookstores, limited as far as bookstores. If they're in Buffalo, Talking Leaves is a great bookstore. So yeah.
So yeah, so you should definitely, this is worth the read, and I think it'll make you think. Um, right? For anybody who wants to just sit with history a little bit, and just messy family history dynamics, um, it was nice. Right?
Thank
It's
you.
it's not a thriller in the sense of, nobody's jumping out of a plane, with a spray of bullets overhead. All right, but this is somebody's story. It's a little snapshot of one family's journey through history, which is important.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's so important to help understand, the world that way, and just to honor one person's journey because every family's got one.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda, for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tony. This was a great conversation. I really appreciated it. And so I'm
Yeah, and I
honored to
hope
be on your show.
and I hope that when you keep writing, because I have a feeling it sparks something. So as you keep coming out with books, please keep coming back and talking to me about them.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.